Okay, so you know how true crime stories usually seem pretty straightforward at first? Like, there's a suspect, some clues, and then bam, case closed. But, um, what if I told you that some of the most mind-blowing cases out there didn't go down like that at all? Actually, it's kind of wild how things can completely flip around when you least expect it. So, stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to be questioning everything you thought you knew about these crimes. Seriously, some of these stories, well, let's just say they're anything but ordinary. Sometimes the people you'd least expect end up being right in the middle of it all. Honestly, before we dive in, let me just say some of these cases took years, sometimes decades, to finally get solved. And the way the investigators pieced everything together, it's honestly like something out of a movie. But nope, this is real life. So, without further ado, let's jump into our list of the top 10 true crimes that were solved with some seriously unexpected turns. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single one. Case number 10, the murder that led to an unbelievable family secret. The case of Martha Moxley. So, this first case takes us back to 1975 in a quiet suburb of Greenwich, Connecticut. The victim was Martha Moxley, a 15-year-old girl who was found murdered in her own backyard. At first, the police thought it was a random attack, maybe a robbery or some local troublemaker. But, well, as the investigation unfolded, things got way more complicated. For years, the case went cold, and nobody really knew who was responsible. Then, in the early 2000s, new evidence surfaced that pointed to someone nobody expected. Michael Skakel, Martha's neighbor and part of the wealthy Kennedy family clan. Now, here's where it gets really wild. The secret that came out wasn't just about who killed Martha. It was about the dark side of family that seemed perfect on the outside. Michael Skakel had been hiding a troubled past, including issues with alcohol and violence, which his family had kept under wraps for decades. And, honestly, this revelation shocked the entire community. It wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was a story about privilege, secrets, and how far some families will go to protect their own. Michael was finally convicted in 2002, nearly 27 years after Martha's death. Yeah, this case really shows how sometimes the truth can stay buried for decades, and when it finally comes out, it can change everything you thought you knew about the people involved. Case number 9, the vanishing heiress who was hiding in plain sight. This second story is about a young heiress. Let's call her Emily, who just disappeared. Like, one day she was there, living this glamorous life, and the next, poof, gone. Now, at first, everyone thought she'd run away or maybe was kidnapped. You know, the usual suspects. But here's the thing. The police were scratching their heads because there were no real clues. No ransom note. No signs of a struggle. It was almost like she vanished into thin air. And, honestly, people were starting to lose hope. Then, after months of dead ends, something kind of crazy happened. A detective, who was just going over old case files, noticed a tiny detail that everyone else had missed: a series of small purchases made with Emily's credit card. But get this, they weren't made where anyone expected. Nope, they were right in her own neighborhood. So, it turns out Emily wasn't missing at all. She was living under a different name, just a few blocks away, trying to escape her own life. Crazy, right? I mean, who would have thought the heiress was hiding in plain sight the whole time? Well, this case really flipped the script on what people assumed about disappearances. It just goes to show, sometimes the truth is way stranger than fiction. Case number 8, the serial burglar who turned out to be a cop. The case of Russell Williams, 2007. So, this next story is honestly one of the most shocking cases involving someone you'd never expect, a high-ranking police officer. I mean, seriously, it's hard to imagine, right? We're talking about Russell Williams, a colonel in the Canadian Forces, and a commander of their Air Force Base in Trenton, Ontario. Everything about him screamed respectable officer, until 2007. It all started when police found evidence linking Williams to a series of break-ins in the area. Yeah, you heard that right. A top military officer was actually breaking into people's homes. At first, it seemed like just petty theft, but, well, things quickly spiraled out of control. As the investigation dug deeper, they uncovered something way worse. Williams was not only a burglar, but also a serial rapist and murderer. The discovery was, honestly, chilling. He had been living a double life, hiding his dark crimes behind a badge and uniform. In 2010, Williams pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with multiple sexual assaults and break-ins. the whole community. And honestly, the whole country was left stunned. How could someone entrusted with protecting others be the one causing so much harm? So, yeah, this case is a stark reminder that evil can sometimes hide in the most unexpected places. And it really makes you think twice about appearances. Case number 7. The cold case cracked by a forgotten diary. The murder of Jeannie Childs, 1993. So, this one really shows how sometimes the smallest clue can totally change everything. We're talking about Jeannie Childs, a 33-year-old woman from Minnesota who was tragically murdered in 1993. For years, her case went cold, like seriously cold. No solid leads, no arrests, just a lot of unanswered questions. Now, here's the crazy part. Fast forward to 2019, over 25 years later, a forgotten diary belonging to Jeannie's ex-boyfriend came to light during a new investigation. And, well, this diary wasn't just some old journal. It contained detailed entries that basically laid out a timeline and some suspicious behavior that no one had noticed before. The investigators used this diary alongside new DNA technology, and, that's when everything started to come together. They identified a suspect who had long evaded justice. The breakthrough came not just from the diary, but from combining it with modern forensic science. In 2020, the suspect was finally arrested and charged, bringing some closure to Jeannie's family after decades of waiting. It's honestly a powerful reminder that sometimes the past holds the key to solving even the coldest cases. It just goes to highlight how persistence and a little bit of luck can crack even the toughest mysteries. Case number 6. The poisoning plot that backfired spectacularly. The murder of Mary McLaughlin, 1984. This next story is pretty unsettling. It's about Mary McLaughlin, a mother of 11 from Glasgow, Scotland, who was tragically murdered back in 1984. For decades, her case was a total mystery. No real leads, no suspects, just a heartbreaking loss. Now, here's the thing. What finally cracked this case wasn't just modern DNA technology, but a tiny cigarette but found in Mary's flat. Yeah, it sounds almost too small to matter, right? But, that cigarette end held the key. For years, it yielded no clues, but thanks to advances in forensic science, they finally got a full DNA profile from it. And, get this, the DNA matched a man named Graham McGill, a known serial sex offender who was on parole at the time of Mary's murder. But here's where it gets really complicated. At first, the timeline didn't add up because McGill was supposedly in prison when Mary was killed. So, detectives had to dig deeper. Then, they found DNA evidence in the knots of the dressing gown cord used to strangle Mary. Again, matching McGill. This was the smoking gun. It turned out he had been out on parole briefly during the time of the murder, which explained the timeline confusion. In 2025, after more than 30 years, Graham McGill was finally identified as Mary's killer. This case is a powerful reminder of how tiny pieces of evidence, like a cigarette butt, can bring justice, even decades later. So, yeah, it's kind of wild how forensic science can turn what seems like a dead end into a breakthrough. And, well, this case really shows that sometimes the truth is hiding in the smallest details. Case number 5. The kidnapping with a twist no one saw coming. The cold case of Christine Gallegos, 1985. This next story is, well, really heartbreaking, but also kind of incredible in how it was finally solved. We're talking about Christine Gallegos, an 18-year-old from Salt Lake City, Utah, who was tragically murdered back in 1985. She was last seen trying to hitchhike to work, and then, well, she was found dead, having been severely beaten, stabbed, and shot. It was a brutal crime that left the community stunned. For decades, the case remained cold. No solid leads, no suspects. And, honestly, people started to lose hope that justice would ever be served. But then, in 2023, detectives decided to take another look at the evidence using some of the latest DNA technology. Here's where it gets really interesting. They sent the DNA samples to a lab that specializes in investigative genetic genealogy, a fancy way of saying they use DNA to build family trees and track down suspects. And, that's when they identified Ricky Lee Stallworth, a 27-year-old U.S. Air Force airman stationed nearby at the time of the murder. What's wild is that Stallworth's name had never come up during the original investigation. He had no known connection to Christine, which made the case even more puzzling. Sadly, Stallworth died of natural causes in 2023, just months before he was identified as the likely suspect. At the end of the day, This case shows how advances in science can breathe new life into cold cases, even after 40 years. And well, it's a bittersweet reminder that sometimes justice comes late, but it still matters. Case number 4. The Double Life of Trusted Neighbor. The Murder of Christina Castiglione, 1983. This next story is about Christina Castiglione, a 19-year-old woman from Redford Township, Michigan, who was tragically murdered back in March 1983. Christina had just left a group of friends after an argument with her boyfriend and was walking home when she disappeared. 8 days later, her body was found miles away. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. It was a brutal crime that left the community shaken. For decades, the case went cold. The DNA evidence collected at the scene was preserved, but, well, it didn't match anyone in the databases at the time. So, it seemed like justice might never come. Then, fast forward to early 2022, thanks to a grant from a nonprofit called Season of Justice, investigators applied the latest DNA genealogy technology to the evidence. And, that's when everything changed. They built a genetic profile that led them to living relatives of Charles Shaw, a local man with troubled past who had died in 1983, the same year Christina was killed. Here's the twist. Shaw had been a trusted neighbor, someone people never suspected. And, well, his dark secret was hidden right under everyone's noses for decades. Thanks to the cooperation of Shaw's family and the relentless work of detectives, including Edwin Moore, who had worked the original case, the cold case was finally solved. It was the first solved case using DNA genealogy for the Livingston County Sheriff's Office, but definitely not the last. This case really shows how science and persistence can unmask the darkest secrets, even when they're buried deep in the past. Case number 3. The heist solved by a cryptic message. The cold case of the Peacock murders, 1989. This next story is about George and Catherine Peacock, an elderly couple from Danby, Vermont, who were tragically stabbed to death in their home back in 1989. The weird thing? There was no sign of forced entry, which totally baffled investigators at the time. Now, for years, the case just sat there, cold, with no solid leads. The couple's son-in-law, Michael Louise, was considered a suspect early on, but, well, there just wasn't enough evidence to charge him. So, the case went quiet for decades. Fast forward to May 2020. A cold case unit re-examined a blood sample found in Louise's car. That's when things started to change. The blood matched George Peacock's DNA, which was a huge breakthrough. By 2022, police arrested Michael Louise for the double homicide, finally bringing justice to the Peacocks after more than 30 years. What's really interesting is how a tiny clue, blood in a car, combined with modern DNA testing, cracked a case that had seemed unsolvable. This really underscores how persistence, new technology, and a little bit of luck can solve even the coldest mysteries. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is hiding in the smallest details. Case number 2. The wrongfully accused who uncovered the real killer. The cold case of Anna Jean Kane, 1988. This next story is pretty intense and, honestly, kind of heartbreaking. It's about Anna Jean Kane, a 31-year-old woman who was brutally murdered on October 23rd, 1988, along a road in Perry Township, Pennsylvania. For decades, her case remained unsolved, and the mystery just haunted community. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. In February 1990, an anonymous letter was sent to a local newspaper, signed by a concerned citizen, and it contained some, chilling details about the murder, details only the killer could have known. The envelope was sealed with saliva, and when investigators tested it years later, the DNA matched a man named Scott Grimm. Grimm was just 26 at the time of the murder, but had died of natural causes in 2018. So he was never brought to trial. Police were able to confirm Grimm's involvement decades later. But here's the twist. While Grimm was identified as a killer, the investigation also uncovered that another man had been wrongfully accused and spent years under suspicion. This revelation brought some closure, but also highlighted how complex and flawed investigations can be. Sometimes justice takes a long time, and that the truth can be buried under layers of mistakes and secrets. Case number 1. The crime that was solved decades later thanks to DNA. The cold case of Esther Williamson, 1974. This final story takes us way back to 1974 in Riverside County, California. The victim was Esther Williamson, a 22-year-old woman who was tragically murdered. For decades, her case remained unsolved, leaving her family and community with so many questions and no answers. Now, here's the thing. Back then, DNA technology didn't exist, so investigators were basically working in the dark. But, Fast forward to 2023, when the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Homicide Team decided to take another look at the evidence using the latest forensic genetic genealogy techniques. They sent preserved evidence to a specialized forensic lab in Texas. And, well, that's when everything started to change. The DNA extracted from the crime scene was matched to a man named William Williamson, who had died in 2014. Interestingly, he had never been cleared by DNA testing during his lifetime, even though he was a suspect back then. This breakthrough finally gave Esther's family the closure they had been waiting for nearly 50 years. And honestly, it's a powerful example of how advances in science can rewrite history and bring justice. Even after all this time, this example proves that no matter how long it takes, the truth has a way of coming out, and that sometimes the smallest piece of evidence can solve the biggest mysteries. So, there you have it. 10 true crime cases that were solved in ways nobody could have predicted. Honestly, some of these stories just blow my mind every time I think about them. It's wild how patience, science, and a little bit of luck can bring justice, even after years or decades. If you're like me, you're probably still trying to wrap your head around some of those twists and turns. So, I'd love to hear from you. Which case shocked you the most? Or maybe there's a story you think we should cover next. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on more crazy true crime stories coming your way. Thanks so much for watching, and, well, until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep questioning everything.